Welcome. My name is Doug Lawrence. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to some new technology that I believe will be pivotal in helping solve the climate crisis, and along the way make us more effective in how to build a bridge to the future. By way of introduction, I have a multidisciplinary background, which includes science and engineering, business, and philosophy. My science and engineering background includes making specialized radiation measurement devices along with dielectric measurement research. My business background includes some 40 years of entrepreneurial business experience in producing high-tech equipment primarily for industry. Last but not least, my philosophical background is focused on the area of axiology. Axiology is the branch of philosophy which is the study of worth and is said to underlie both ethics and aesthetics. Now, ultimately, I believe that all three of these disciplines must work in tandem to produce a good solution for the climate crisis. This introductory video is really intended for a technical audience, although someone non-technical could watch it and certainly get a lot out of it. I'll be referring to such things as the energy budget, the reflectivity of various materials, emissivity, and using of basic principles of black body radiation and gases. Also assume that the familiar with the solutions that are on the table for solving the climate crisis, and that you have a familiarity with the IPCC report, the latest report, AR6, along with the understanding of the COP26 meeting, which occurred in the fall of last year. We want to begin by looking at the current solution set that's on the table for solving the climate crisis. And to do that, easiest way is to look at the energy budget. That will allow us to look at characterize various responses that we have to the climate crisis. Most everyone is familiar with this diagram, with the yellow portion being the shortwave radiation coming from the sun, reflecting from the clouds, reflecting from the Earth, going back up to outer space. And also the orange portion over here, which depicts the long wave radiation activity. Now, as it stands right now, the number one solution for solving the climate crisis is obviously to cut back CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gases for that matter. By my estimate, I would say at least 95% of all our resources are focused on that effort, either in proving what the current effects are of CO2 or predicting what they will be in the future and what their impact will be, and then looking at various ways to cut back on fossil fuel emissions and coming up with substitute paths for energy. The other solutions that we have, some people think of them as geoengineering solutions. The IPCC has their categorization system, which I'll follow here. They divide it into carbon dioxide removal, which most everyone is familiar with, where we pull carbon dioxide out of the air and sequester it. But then there's another category that they have, which is solar radiation modification. And it's on this last category, the solar radiation modification, that we want to turn our attention to. So just so everybody's on board, there are currently outlined in AR6 5 solutions that come under the category of solar radiation modification. The first SAI stands for Stratospheric Aerosol Intervention, which refers to injecting aerosols into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. The next is marine cloud brightening, wherein sea salt or other particles are injected into marine clouds to brighten them and have them reflect more energy. Last, we have Cirrus Cloud Thinning, where the idea there is to seed those clouds so that there will be a thinning effect which would allow more long-wave radiation to escape into outer space. But now we can get to some more down-to-earth solutions, so to speak, in that there are proposals on the table to, one is called OAC, which stands for Ocean Albedo Change, whereby we put foam or bubbles on the surface of the ocean, and in fact cause that to be more reflective and reflect more sunlight. And then finally we get to Ground Based Albedo Measurements, which is shown here as GBAM. And there you have such solutions that you've heard of about painting roofs silver or white, and then also doing things with crops, say, to make them more reflective by planting more reflective crops, or doing bioengineering to make crops or other plant life more reflective. So in our discussion today, what we want to look at is new solutions that go well beyond the ones that are on the table. And these solutions, as we'll see here, solutions I'm going to be focusing on are ground-based solutions. And I'm going to be discussing a number of ideas and principles that haven't previously been entertained. So we want to begin by recognizing that we're going to take a systems approach. Makes a lot of sense to take a systems approach to a systems problem. And I'm going to show you here a system that you have not seen before. So the system that I want to talk to you about today consists of these what I call climate remediation panels, which are depicted down here. And these climate remediation panels interact with radiation such they reflect it into both shortwave and longwave into outer space. They are monitored by our satellite systems, which are totally capable. They have both shortwave and longwave sensors in the satellites. And that information is then collected and analyzed, and then we adjust these panels according to what's needed and what our goals are. Now, the thing in question is, what are these climate control panels? That'll be something very new. So the climate control panels, you can have an analogy to solar panel farms, although we are not in any way collecting energy. We're trying to get rid of energy. But the concept of an array of panels is similar. So what is a climate control panel? So we want to define a climate control panel which is reflective on one side and emissive on the other side, and it's actually mounted so that it can be rotated. So nothing of this sort has ever been proposed where there was some dynamics associated with some reflectivity or emissivity scheme. Now these panels are intended to be mounted into frames. And the way it works is during the daytime, we would be in reflective mode with the panels being the reflective side up. At nighttime, we would strive for nighttime cooling and the emissive side is up. But also note there is a safety position, extremely important, whereby the panels are vertical and have little or no effect on the downwelling radiation. Now let's take a look at the reflective mode for a second, because there are some things here that are quite different than what have been proposed in the past. But by way of review, most everybody's familiar with the fact that the Earth's really not that reflective, so there's a lot to work with. For instance, snow is way up here at 85%, but there's a lot of stuff down here, 25% or so, and water, which comprises over 70% of the planet, is not very reflective at all, is mostly absorptive. And so we have a situation here where if we put a substance such as aluminum on these panels, the reflectivity is way, way up here, which gives us a good differential. Specifically, I mention aluminum because this is another good example of some things that I think have been overlooked. Aluminum reflects both in the visible and in the infrared spectrum. So we can reflect both visible and infrared light. And something like that's really never been considered before. On the emissive side, we're looking at having black body, a perfect black body on this panel, and with the thought in mind that we want to emit more radiation through the atmospheric window and help cool the Earth down at night as well. There's also shading effects here because, of course, these panels are reflecting sunlight during the daytime, but also this region of Earth or ground underneath is being cooled, and that cool can be transferred through advection to adjacent regions. And you might want to think of them as miniature shade trees. So my point is that if we are clever about it and we take advantage of the types of things that I've spoken about here, that we can get a 10x improvement in efficacy over what anyone else has ever considered. And this is both also a day-night diurnal solution, which has never been in place before, and also note the safety aspects of it, where you can literally turn the thing off. The next thing I want to look at is incremental deployment. If you compare this to, say, aerosols, we can control where we inject the aerosols and how much we inject, but after that we pretty much lose control of the situation, and that's not the system for these panels. They're far different. So we want to look at what might be a deployment scheme for these panels, and we're going to look in two ways. One, just exactly how many panels do we need, how much energy do we have to reflect into outer space. And so for that discussion, I have here the graph from the NOAA website, which shows the greenhouse gas growth from 1979 up to the year 2020. Now, if you look at that, you can easily see the increase of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, and note that we dump about 40 billion tons per year. Now, what I really care about is when we dump that energy into the atmosphere, what type of forcing that results in. And over here on the y-axis, you can see the forcings are listed out, or numerically listed, to show exactly what the forcing effect is of these additions, of these greenhouse effects. So what my goal is to look at how many panels we would need to cancel the effects each year of the CO2 that's added. So for that, we look at the slope of this line, and we note that the slope of this line is such that there is 0.036 watts per meter squared increase in forcing each year, and that would be a good target for determining how many panels we put in. Of course, you could do less if you wanted to, or if you wanted to go overboard and really do a good job, you could put in more. If we relate this back to COP26 goals, which is shown in this diagram, then the COP26 goals attempt to achieve this light blue line here, instead of just doing nothing and having the temperature climb up, as shown in this red area here, with the goal being that by 2050 that our emissions have dropped down effectively to what's called net zero, resulting in less than a 1.5 degrees C change. Now, with these panels, we can compensate for these CO2 emissions, and if we compensate each year for the amount that's emitted, then we can bring what is in effect net zero down immediately. And if we continue to put panels in each year to cancel out the effects of the CO2 for each of those years, we can hold that zero emissions. So that gives great hope and an entirely different way of dealing with net zero goals. Now, the next thing I want to look at is the deployment patterns. So this is very critical, because when any solar radiation modification is looked at, the most important thing is what could be the side effects. So you have to have some way to combat that. So let's take a look at that. So the first off, if we look at these are meant to be not ocean-based panels, because I think that would be impractical to install, maintain, and float those panels. It would be cost prohibitive. However, if we look at land-based modifications or interventions between north and south longitudes of 40 degrees, where the most sunlight is, then we could deploy them in those regions. And there's two schools of thought there could be on these deployments. The safest, you could argue, would be a highly distributed deployment. So there's 600,000 villages in India and some 600,000 villages in China. And just as an example, if you put a quarter square mile of panel in each of those places, that would add up to an enormous amount of modification. However, if the panels are highly distributed, then that keeps the panels from interfering with circulation patterns of the weather in any one spot and would have minimal effect, in my opinion. You could also look at this the other way. You could look at it as doing regional adjustments. So if you had some region that you wanted to fix or modify, you could put some concentration of panels in that region. Or to further that example, if you had a hot city like Phoenix, which is a heat island, you may want to put panels around that city to help reduce the effects of that hot spot. One other thing I'd like to point out is when we talk about the ocean or water, there is, of course, lake water as well. So the lakes comprise some 1 million square miles of lakes in the world. And because of the high differential with these panels compared to water, those lakes become a possible target. Now, I'm not talking about covering up all the lakes, but out of a million square miles, if we were to cover over, say, 10,000 square miles of lake over time, such that it didn't really interfere, but actually helped the lake cool down. I'd like to summarize now. This has been a brief introduction to this topic. And since I had said I had a background in axiology, I want to point out that axiologists like to look at the good-making properties of any solution. So I just put 7 down here, which I think are important to point out, that are unique about this solution. First off, they are safe. The safety aspect of this is they're programmable, and you can do with them what you will. You can distribute them as you choose, and so you have a great deal of control what the effects of the panels are. And we can change our mind, and as we educate ourselves on their performance, we can act accordingly. 2, we haven't talked about the pricing of these panels, but it's generally agreed in the climate community that any geoengineering solution is much cheaper than what we're currently pursuing. And so I would propose that this approach is at least 10 times less expensive than anything else. The other thing some people look at is social justice. Obviously, this type of solution allows us to put us in a position where we do not have to penalize other developing countries by forcing them into uncomfortable positions relative to their energy. Next, the economic benefits. Instead of coming along with a solution that has a lot of economic penalties, we see that this is a solution that has many economic benefits. Another thing that's important is there's no new inventions required here. All the science surrounding these panels in terms of the materials and how they interact with radiation is well known, as many peer-reviewed journal articles about cooling the Earth down using reflective materials, as well as cooling it down with nighttime techniques. The fact that there's no new inventions needed means we can proceed down the road without delay. Next, it creates jobs. This is take a lot of people to manufacture, install, and maintain these panels, not to mention the resources in the climate science community that analyze the data from the satellites and help see what the effects of the panels are and can advise how to use them effectively. Next, I wanted to look at stopping tipping points. Now, stopping tipping points is something that's on many people's mind, and to date, no one's really come up with something that could be scaled to help out tipping points. Tipping points can recur regardless of whether the CO2 is from man-made sources or from a volcano or forest fire. But to be able to handle tipping points, you need a wide range of control, and that control has to be programmable so you can scale it according to what's needed at any particular point in time. So in conclusion, and back to the beginning of this, our real goal here is to help build a bridge to the future. So we know that fossil fuels are one way. We have about 100 years left or more on those fossil fuels, but ultimately we do have to replace them because we're going to run out. But more important, we can have a second parallel path of these panels, which I call climate panel modification or remediation, and they are meant to be run in parallel with the fossil fuel efforts of green energy. As you know, those efforts will fail, and the reason they will fail standing by themselves is because just with one fact, the fact that China and Russia do really not cooperating with that approach means that 33% of the emissions go without being addressed. So if we can go this distance and have this parallel solution, then things become more doable. Now, what needs to happen next for this is we're trying to get the word out and to educate people on what these panels are and what they could do. Obviously, we need modeling, but our approach is both modeling and empirical data to help study the efficacy of the panels and also study different deployment patterns to get a good understanding of good and bad things that could happen. Funding for this effort can be through grants, philanthropy, or private equity, and we believe the funding will come once the solution is put on the table and understood. The next thing we're really interested in is a prototype panel farm. So we would envision a panel farm which may be perhaps just 1 square mile in area, which is monitored by the satellite systems and coordinated with NOAA so that the effects of the panels can be studied and analyzed. And then in turn, the science behind it can be studied and we have empirical data to help back it up. If you like what you're seeing here and you would like to have input, I welcome any questions or comments or for anyone who would like to get involved. My contact for information is doug@earth-shine.com. The website for this is www.earthshine.com. And I want to thank you for listening to me today. And I hope you like what you saw and makes you optimistic about the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.